What's up, everyone? I'm here for the next episode, and today I have Grant Iflander with me. Did I say that right?
Ifflander.
Iflander. Every time I say his name, I feel like I'm talking about a superhero, and in many ways, it's true. Grant is a yogi, musician, and storyteller who is mostly interested in the fundamental question: how can we do it better? His life has been dedicated to the study, practice, and delivery of the wisdom sciences of yoga and tantra, which are part of the larger mission of bringing people back into alignment with their innermost self, with nature, and with the supreme intelligence, which is constantly guiding us all towards harmony, peace, and joy. As a good friend of mine, of ours, would say, that's a prayer God can work with. So, without much further ado, we're going to get right into it. And Grant's going to begin by offering us a bit of an idea of who he was before he began working with psychedelics, plant medicines, entheogens, and a bit of a recap and summary of who he is now sitting in front of us. And then we're going to go into the art of storytelling and see what kind of stories want to fill that space in between point A and point B. So, with that, Grant Iflander.
Thank you, Anker.
All right.
Uh, yeah, so who I was before Entheogens,
Yeah.
psychedelics. So I'm gonna tell a story of like timeline, because I started having my first psychedelic experiences as a teenager, 13 years old, my first time having psilocybin mushrooms, and started to explore pretty regularly the use of psilocybin. And at that age, I didn't have enough of a metaphysical understanding of anything or a spiritual framework to be able to navigate the those experiences for myself.
Mm.
Um, and I just thought they were fun, but I was having some powerful experiences as a kid. And so, yeah, but so that was way back when, right?
What do you imagine those experiences as a kid did for you?
Well, I think they took me out of my ordinary, same thing they do now is take me out of my ordinary perception mode of perceiving reality. Yeah. And I saw that there was way more to it than I was in my default operating mode perceiving. And so I don't think that they did anything necessarily like ultimately favorable, nor do I think that they took anything away. But they definitely opened the door to uh because then when I got older and I started to realize the power of these technologies, so called technologies, plant medicine is a
Hmm.
form of technology.
Yeah, true.
Um, I started to be more careful actually with how I engage with them. So whereas when I was 13, 14, 15 years old, I wouldn't think twice about eating 2 or 3 grams or 4 grams of dried mushrooms
Mm.
and not having like a set plan and not having, I didn't have like a ceremonial container that I was setting. I was just like, yeah, let's eat 3 grams of mushrooms.
So that's a good point. At what point did you learn that a plan is helpful?
I think when I got into my spiritual practice with meditation and yoga, and I started to realize that having some sort of clear ritual space to do work inside of, and then so I had to like kind of in my own journey come to realize, well, what am I trying to do? What if this is no longer just something recreational, then what am I trying to do? Why would I want to eat mushrooms or take LSD or drink ayahuasca or whatever the whatever the thing was? Like, why would I want to?
Hmm.
And um, and so as I started to get clear about my reasons for engagement, and yeah, as I got clear about my reasons for engagement, it made me a lot more intentional about how I used it or didn't use it. And so for many years, I didn't take any substances. I was just practicing yoga and pursuing that path without any additional things. And so to finish answering your question about who was I before psychedelics, well, I have to go back to being 12 years old,
Mm.
you know.
Allow me to
So
refine that question then. Who were you before you started to use these technologies, these entheogenic technologies, before you started to use them in a way intended towards growth and healing?
in no longer just recreational, like for fun.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
doing the work, being on the
yeah,
path.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Who was I before that? Um, yeah, I was curious, you know, I was really interested in any anything that I perceived could help me wake up, you know, anything that I perceived could help me see something I wasn't seeing in myself, grow. Dude, I was just so freaking hungry for growth, you know, like I was just like willing to do whatever I needed to do to grow. And
What was your age then?
this is like 24, 25,
Hmm.
24, 25, 26. Those years of my life when I first started practicing yoga more seriously and kind of came onto that path. Um, like I said, I wasn't taking substances, but I was just very extreme with what I was doing, you know, so extended fasts, very long and intense sadhanas, um, restricted diet, just extreme things that would that made were confronting to my ego, you know,
Mm.
and created a lot of friction in my system. And I think that psychedelics or plant medicine can do the same thing. They can confront the ego and they can create friction, which is what I think, you know, if a journey with a medicine is difficult, it's often, in my experience, is because there's some sort of friction that's happening inside of the container of the work, and that friction can be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so, who I was before that, well, I was doing the same thing. I just wasn't taking plant medicine, and I was just curious and quite intense, and a little extreme, and like uh, yeah. So that's who I was before, and yeah.
Mm. Before we move on to the next part of the question, I'm curious because I understand a bit of your history. Were you a bodybuilder or did you simply like lift weights a lot?
Yeah, I was a weightlifter,
Okay.
and so I always, when I was weightlifting, I was training for the sport of weightlifting, and Olympic weightlifting, snatch and clean and jerk. And so I was at one point an amateur weightlifter. I never made it to a professional level with sponsorship, blah blah blah. But I was training for competition and training for performance. Um, I never went the route of training for physique or bodybuilding competition, which is a different branch of fitness, I guess you could say. But definitely had the aesthetics, you know, and
Mhm.
of like my weightlifting background lent itself to like a well-built physique and things like that. But that was never the goal. The goal was to be like squatting 500 pounds and, you know,
Yeah.
doing crazy feats of strength and stuff like that.
I definitely thank myself for spending a lot of time with weights in my youth. I think I know the things that we do when we're young and malleable definitely stay with us and they create this certain foundation, this constitution. And I think that's a lot to do with how I am built now and that I don't need to lift weights as much as I used to. I don't anymore to maintain like this physique. Though my question there is, did you use psychedelics in any way as an adjunct to that practice?
Weightlifting?
Yeah.
No. Cannabis? Yeah,
Uh,
I did work with cannabis. I would take like one toke before like a intense weightlifting session, and I found that with the right amount of ganja, like not too much,
mm,
I could really lock in my focus and my concentration inside of the container of the gym session, right? Because the gym session itself was a ritual container. You know, I'd go in at this time and I'd be committed to doing this until this time. And inside of that container, um, I'm confronting myself. I'm confronting different aspects of my psyche. I'm confronting things in my life that I might not be willing to look at or necessarily have the time and space to look at outside of some sort of container. So yeah, the gym was like a ritual process in that respect.
So to recap, the grant before intentional use of psychedelics, being on the path of using them as a technology to support our growth, was hungry, like a seeker, truth, and wisdom. And you said something about having lots of energy, like really excited about life. Was there anything you were struggling with at that point in your life before we move forward?
Fuck yeah, dude, I'm struggling with lots of stuff. I was yeah, oh geez, let's go back. So 23, 24, 25 years old. I was largely bereft of like a legitimate spiritual practice at that time. I was looking for that. I was seeking that, but I didn't have that. And so I was reading a lot of self-development books. I was doing a lot of things to help me align myself with what I perceived was important. And what my health was not in a good place. Relationships were not in a good place. I was dealing with like different aspects of addiction, like binge eating, like binge eating, and like sugar addiction, and yeah, those were the main things. My body didn't feel super good. I didn't feel like it's like was I looked like I was in good shape,
Yeah.
but I wasn't in good shape, So, yeah.
And now fast forward about a decade from there.
About 10 years, yeah.
So tell us in your own words, who are you now?
Who am I now? That's a question I'm asking myself every day.
It's part of the work.
Who am I? What do I want to do? That's a good question. I don't know. Who am I now? I suppose I definitely hope that I'm a little bit better of a human being than I was back then. I certainly make less of the same mistakes. I still make many mistakes, but I make less of the same ones, thankfully. And yeah, I'm still curious about everything, still hungry for growth, still willing to try things that will help me grow, but definitely a lot more discerning about how and why I choose to engage in those things. Yeah, way more discerning, I would say, and a little less reckless. I would say like back then I was more reckless and because I think courage and recklessness they can be similar energies, but maybe courage has a little more discernment with it. Whereas back then I was courageous and reckless and I would just do whatever, willing just to do it. And now
like big hero energy as opposed to like warrior energy.
Yeah. Imbalance in that. And so yeah, I feel a lot more grounded and centered in myself and my path. I'm a lot more clear about my path, and which allows me to have much more understanding of what really is going to be helpful for me and or not.
Okay, so I'm hearing more grounded, more centered, less reckless, far more discerning, and you've got a clear spiritual path now. I know you didn't say that, but you mentioned earlier that wasn't so well defined.
Yeah.
And so from A to B, from there to here, I'd like you now to fill the space with the stories of growth and transformation that have been supported in some way by entheogens. And as you put it, the bridge between entheogens and enlightenment for you. How have they supported you becoming this man?
Geez, well, my first time drinking ayahuasca was in 2016. No, excuse me, 2015. Um, and that came at a time in my life where I was really, really deep into my path with yoga and very kind of purist in that way. And it was interesting because in my meditations, I started to receive guidance that I was supposed to experiment with ayahuasca, and never had any experience with ayahuasca. Didn't know anybody who had any experience with ayahuasca, so it was kind of out of the blue. But like when those messages where that guidance comes in, I tend to listen, because it might seem like it's out of the blue, but it's coming from some, for me at least, it was coming from some source that was important to pay attention to.
Mm.
And so I got that guidance to um, work with ayahuasca. And then like a month later, a very close friend of mine and a mentor was like, "Hey, I want you to come and do this ayahuasca ceremony with me." And I had no idea that he knew anything about ayahuasca either. So it was just kind of a perfect alignment. And so I was like, yeah, okay, I'm in. And so I went to New Mexico and drank medicine with the Shipibo maestro there. And that was my first time drinking ayahuasca. And, I think the last time I had anything to do with psychedelics before that was a couple years prior with like mushrooms or LSD or something like that. So, um, and it was interesting because I didn't have any sort of psychedelic journey with the medicine. I drank 3 or 4 cups of medicine the first night, and not a single time in the night did I have any feeling of being like I was under the influence of psychedelics.
Mm.
Um, or any sort of plant medicine for that matter. Like I didn't feel like altered in my consciousness. It's just kind of sitting there meditating and breathing and asking myself the question, why am I doing this? Going back to what I was saying earlier, like why would I want to do something? And it was to learn about myself, to grow in some way, to look into the dark. I always heard ayahuasca was helpful to kind of open the door and look at the psyche. And then after that, it was 2 nights, and both of the nights were insignificant as far as what I'm saying is concerned. But I took that as a sign to focus on my path with yoga. And so then I did. And then fast forward years later, I was then invited to another ayahuasca ceremony here in Costa Rica. And um, and that ceremony, this was now in 2021, opened the door to my path now with plant medicine.
Can you tell us more about that sign? How did that come to you? How did you receive this sign from ayahuasca to focus more on your path with yoga?
Well, I was just asking myself the question, why am I here drinking? Why am I spending money to do this thing and nothing's happening? And as I'm sitting there and I'm consulting with my soul or my higher self or my guardian spirit, um, the answer was like, you don't need to worry about this right now. Just focus on yoga. And I was like, okay.
Like, go back to work.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.
You got it.
Yeah. And I was like, okay. And so I did. And almost 5 years, 6 years later, after all that time with my path with yoga, and then I was living here in Costa Rica, and then I got a message from the fire, actually, from the Duni fire ritual that I practice. And the fire told me quite clearly, it's like ayahuasca. And I was like, oh, okay. All right.
Go back.
Yeah, basically. And then I like waited, and then a friend said, hey, what are you doing for Shivaratri, which was like it's the new moon before the vernal equinox. In the yogic tradition, it's a really important new moon of honoring the energy of Shiva. And so this was in March 2021. And he's like, what are you doing for Shivaratri, and the night of Shiva? And I was like, I'm probably going to do my own little ritual thing, And it's like, I think I want you to come to this ayahuasca ceremony with me. I was like, okay, yes, because in my head I remembered receiving the message that I needed to go with the medicine again.
Yeah, you had the invitation.
I had the
waited
invitation.
for the
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And so I went, and it turns out it was an all-night Duni, with mantras all night for Shivaratri. And so
Somebody else holding the duty.
mhm.
Oh wow.
I mean, not the Duni in the way that I'm familiar with practicing, but the Duni being a fire in the center and mantras all night. And so it was like super familiar for me because after all those years prior, focused on yoga. So what did I do? I focused on yoga and chanting and mantras and fire and da 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 da. And then years later, I'm now invited to drink ayahuasca again, but inside of a container that was very familiar to me, a fire, chanting mantras.
Oh
Right.
wow.
And so now my path with yoga was then brought into with the medicine. The two just kind of came together.
You were showed how they can harmonize.
Harmonize.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Another beautiful thing I like about this story of yours, it models an aspect of integration really well, in that you waited until you got a clear sign from spirit, from your guardians, while in your spiritual practice, in your duty. They're like, hey, might consider going back. And with that information, you didn't seek it out.
Mm-hmm.
You waited for that opportunity to show up.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, that is the best way to navigate this work. There's no need to say yes to every invitation that comes your way. It's about this internal guidance. And in the end, when it comes to integration, one of the most important things to pay attention to is the honest response you get from yourself when you say, am I ready for another ceremony? Because you could still be in your practice every morning, in your sadhana, doing your yoga, meditation, breath work, what have you, in the wake of your most recent ceremony. But the only way you can tell is if you truly have that embodied relationship with your intuition, your knowing. And you combine that with powerful relationship with spirit. I really love hearing that. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
And just the way it came together. I knew about this ceremony you went to, but I didn't know that it showed you how you can combine this practice that you were already so devoted to with something that was newly coming into your life. Mm-hmm. Super cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it was cool. Because then after that, it was like, let's go kind of thing. Like, it was interesting.
Well, your life really took off from that point. I could just say from a witnessing point of view, because we were both here in the mountain around that time you returned to ayahuasca. And I remember noticing like a shift in the way you were showing up after coming back from that journey. And then shortly afterwards, I remember you saying, I'm going to create some offering for the world. Something about like being guardians of the earth. I think we're going to call it keepers of the earth. And then shortly after that, you made it.
I met you 3 months after that first journey, my first journey back, because I moved up here in May, but moving up here was an extension of the path with ayahuasca, actually.
Okay.
I started drinking medicine again in March 2021, but the medicine showed me that it was time to study with her, and so I came up here where I could deepen my studies,
I see.
my own path and my own practices, but also drink medicine as part of that.
There was some retreat I was thinking about, some ceremony you went to with Felix somewhere in Peru. Different one?
Different one, yeah.
Okay, thank you for correcting that.
Yeah.
So it was the outcome of that return to ayahuasca that brought you to the mountain to deepen your practice with it in the technology that you've been devoted to already of yoga. Cool. What next?
Like right now?
Well, what happened after that? Or what's the next important story you'd like to share?
Well, yeah. I think that maybe, talking about my first introduction with ayahuasca and receiving clear instructions, it's like, it's not time to work with that medicine. And then fast forward to being reintroduced to it and how much growth I perceived in myself in that time between having come back to the medicine, and then it kind of revealing to me, hey, now you are ready. And now let's study, let's practice. And so you're asking the question, what's next? Well, yeah, lots of music, basically. It was like there was a huge expansion for me musically and creatively, which I attribute to it was in parallel to me coming into a regular, frequent relationship with ayahuasca. And so, and I feel like the 6 years in between was enough time to develop like the energetic capacity and the strength and the health. Like I had, yeah, come into a place of like vitality and robustness and energetic strength and capacity that allowed me then to come to the medicine with a completely different set of tools and capacities, really. So that when I started drinking medicine, I could receive a lot more from it. And a lot of that had to do with like musical expansion and creative expansion. Yeah.
Good. There's something to that, isn't there? Like music and medicine.
Music
I
is
always find that there's a certain point in a ceremony, particularly ayahuasca, sometimes mushrooms, that I either get called to my instruments or someone invites me to. I sing songs I'm familiar with, but there's something new about them, like a different energy, even a different voice sometimes. You experience that ever?
yes. Yeah, I think the medicine for me, mushrooms do this too. I think psychedelics in general have the capacity to deactivate what is our usual personality, basically the ego. And when that is deactivated, because the ego is a process of contraction, it's a contractile mechanism. Without that contraction, the voice, which is pure, the voice doesn't have personality. Well, when your personality is out of the way, there's just this open channel of sound and vibration that comes through, and it's like, yeah, it's beautiful. And I've had some, like rapturous moments, you could say, like while singing, where it's like I'm in complete, connection with the divine, and out there's sounds coming out of my voice, and it's someone else's voice that I'm hearing, but it sounds beautiful and I love it. But it happens to be me with the guitar in my hand singing, and I'm like, whoa.
You're an instrument at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a beautiful experience to have. I don't think that's the point, though. I think that those moments, like whether or not someone is a musician, right, and playing music actively for ceremonies, it's a way to support it, or someone who's with some medicine and singing, because in the ceremonies that I've been to, even though there might be someone who's leading the song, other people can sing along, and so there becomes a practice of how to actually harmonize in the current of what's opening up in the space. It's an ikaro or a medicine song or a melody, and to be able to actually like tune in and listen and enter that current together, and then the current kind of opens up, and I think that when you taste and feel that current, it is like a repatterning, and repattern things in the mind.
I want to speak a bit to that. You mentioned how with these medicines, in many ways, in different ways, with different medicines, the ego takes a back seat. And science is going to show that the parts of our brain that make up the ego, they call this default mode network. And this is what gets subdued or largely shut down. And so it opens your brain up. It creates these neural pathways that are receptive to new ways of being. And so when we're invited to express ourselves in these states with the ego largely offline, or the ways it's most used to activating, taking a back seat, you do come out a little differently. And especially if you continue to practice what it is that happened in ceremony, those songs, you do it with others. And I'm also reminded that, as far as mythology goes, they all seem to agree that everything was created from sound, logos. Even Tolkien in the Silmarillion, which I'm still trying to get through, but I read the first part. And the origin story of this world, of these gods, they were frequencies, they were sounds. And they decided to become manifest in order to enjoy themselves, and the differentiation of their disparate frequencies. And of course, you get the super high frequency Iluvatar, but then the lower ones are like, we're gonna go create orcs, and we're gonna call this Mordor, and I'm Sauron.
Mm, mm. What was the book that you read, like talking or reading?
The Silmarillion is the precursor story to The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. It's the creation myth of the world.
Cool.
Yeah.
I want to read it.
And it starts with creation myth with sound and light.
Wow. Great.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, it does.
Mm, mhm, mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that I'm just to add a little bit on that topic of sound and ceremony and plant medicine, and also your question of like, who am I now?
Mhm.
My study with the plants, which has been pretty extensive. Like I wouldn't say that I haven't like apprenticed with a master, or I haven't spent a significant amount of time uh, with any one particular teacher, which I think is in my opinion one of the ways, or perhaps the only way, to really receive the the intelligence of the study of people who have spent generations working with these plants. And it could be different, so many different lineages, but I think that the idea of apprenticing and spending time in close proximity with people who are living this work, living this path, is the way to really learn. And I haven't done that. So even though my work with, for example, ayahuasca has been frequent and extensive, it's been on largely my own terms. And it's been within the framework of my own journey in path of yoga. And so I say that because I don't know. There's just a lot I don't know. But what I do know, or at least what I have some understanding around, it's in with respect to sound and the mysticism of sound. And so that's what I'm bringing constantly to the ceremonies is my own study, my own understanding of the dynamics of sound and vibration and the laws of the universe, basically, which are structured around sound, and, as you said, creation mythologies and things like that. So that's who I am now, is a curious seeker who's fascinated by the laws of the universe with respect to these principles of sound and the principles of music and harmony. And so I'm studying these things in my daily life, and then I'm bringing my study and I'm bringing my practice with and around them into the ceremony spaces that I am attending.
There's certainly something to that. There's an old saying, when villagers or tribes people would come to their elders and they're not feeling well, the first thing that they would say was, when's the last time that you sang? When's the last time that you danced? And, in the background of my mind, as I navigate all these different technologies and practices and medicines, the thing that often shows up and speaks quite loudly is, hey, you're doing great, all these things, and you should be singing more, learn more music, dance more, share that, because that really is something akin to our essence, our truth, energy and motion. I'd like to ask, if you're open to this, sharing a story about your most challenging or harrowing experience with an entheogen.
My most challenging or harrowing experience with an entheogen. So when I was in Peru for a plant diet, I went down for 2 weeks in 2021 to work with a curandero, specifically to do a master plant diet, which is like, for those of you who aren't familiar, master plant diet is a time in isolation with a strict food diet that has most often no salt, no spices, no oils, nothing that's going to stimulate our mind, and very plain, basic, bland food, and isolation. And the reason that we do that is because it helps us enter into a better, more intimate relationship with the plants. And so I was working with Bobensana, and every other night we would drink ayahuasca. And and I was not having like powerful visual experiences, or like I wasn't really receiving so much from the ceremonies. Like I would drink like a large cup of medicine, which is not a still a good amount of medicine, but I wasn't having, my world wasn't like yeah, from the sounds that I heard in the Maloka of other people's experiences, I was wondering when that was going to happen.
Some kind of comparing going on.
Yeah. And I was like, maybe I need to drink more medicine. And so I go up to the maestro and I'm like, hey, like I'm having like very mild experiences, and I'm wondering if like it would be better for me to just drink all the medicine for the night all at once. So instead of drinking and then waiting and then drinking some more and then waiting and drinking some more, I was like, why don't I just drink it all at once? And he was like, if you want to. So I was like, okay. And so I ended up drinking a very large amount of ayahuasca in one sitting, more than I would recommend, and more than I probably would ever do again. And I was just so uncomfortable. Like I was just like, could not stop yawning, and I could not stop, like I couldn't get comfortable. I was restless in my body, but like for the most part, it was just physically uncomfortable. There wasn't like a psychological or emotional thing until a little bit later in the night, and then I started to take a downward spiral into kind of really understanding why I was even on diet in the first place. Because I had in my mind, I had my idea why I was going to do a diet, which was largely a function of like my, yeah, Western mind, the ego, objective, achievement, something, I need to do this for blah, blah, blah. And I got taken down and I got shunned very humbly that that's not why I was there. And that's when the real healing started, like real deep transformation, real deep exposure of things that I wasn't aware. I didn't know. And for the next two ceremonies after that, because I was in the middle of the diet, this diet was 10 days.
Drinking each day.
Every other day.
Yeah.
So 5 ceremonies. And that
in
night,
a short period of time.
Yeah. And that happened, what that experience I just described happened maybe on like the second ceremony night. So I was still I was less than halfway through the diet. And for the next 2 ceremony nights, it was like an ongoing digging into the hole that had opened up for me of like, really, what does it mean to pray? Why am I praying? What am I praying to? What am I praying for? How to pray? Like those were some of the things that started to reveal themselves to me. And in addition to that, I was being exposed to all sorts of layers of how inauthentic I was, how much of a coward I was. Like there were a lot of very deep things that got like,
you hadn't touched before in prior ceremonies.
No, lots, many layers of inauthenticity were exposed, and I had to confront them, and I had to come to peace with them, and I had to, because otherwise I would have just like fragmented and ended up a mess. But that's not what happened. I mean, I made it through, but I got to the bottom of the barrel, and it was like, if you could imagine, like I was just like picturing a barrel and like all the sediments on the bottom, and you go in and you're trying to clean the barrel, and there's just like a layer of caked crap at the bottom, and you're like using like a iron scrub brush, and you're like, and then all that stuff got it. So that was kind of like, I was like, the barrel's clean, you can feel it. You can feel it with stuff, and like the water's not tainted, but then as soon as you start to scrub the stuff on the bottom, everything's tainted. So that was kind of like what my experience was. It was humbling.
A lot of discomfort in the body.
Yeah. A lot
and
of
it was the result of you being like, hey, where's my experience?
Yes. Yeah. I'm like, when's this gonna happen to me? Like, I'm bored.
Ayahuasca is tricky like that. It continues to be the most tricky medicine. I never quite know what's going to happen. And at this point of having many of my own experiences and collecting many others,
Unexpected.
sometimes it's just like it's chill. And you're sitting there, stomach ache, maybe a few farts, play some songs, you feel good. My first experience was much like the one you shared, where it's like I didn't really get much. Like I woke up the next morning, felt some kind of openness, something like cleared or cleansed, but it was like line in this like the sands of time that kind of just shifted the direction of my life so slightly.
Hmm.
I look back at that time, I'm like, that's when everything started to change. Even
Yeah.
though it wasn't cosmic and visionary, that all came in the Amazon. But it's it's such a unpredictable teacher.
Mhm. Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think the unpredictability of uh, psychedelics has to do with the unpredictability of our own psyche and how little. I don't believe that we have as much control as we think we do.
True.
And I think that our subconscious and unconscious psyche is an enormous amount, so much information in there that's unstructured and is quite chaotic and terrifying if we were able to actually see the totality of what's inside of us, yeah, and the potentials for tremendous good and terrible bad. Like those potentials exist inside of all of us, I
Yep.
believe, and the codes for them are in our DNA and our genes. And so it we are it's like we're the intelligence that is in us that is creating the potentials for good and bad is also hiding the potentials for good and bad from us, and it's hiding it very cleverly, and it's kind of creating a mask of oh yeah, but I understand what's going on. And like, so it's like the intelligence is so smart that it will convince us that we know, and it will be very convincing that we know, but it's really kind of not true, like on an ultimate level. And I think what psychedelics do is that it opened the door to the fact that not only do I not know, but there's so much I don't know, and that all is inside of me and it's influencing me. And so I think that when it comes to working with psychedelics, it opens that door, and it's like we don't know what we're gonna get. It's opening sacred space inside of our psyche, and the danger of that, just to like kind of jump ahead a little bit, is that
Hmm.
when we enter into sacred space, sacred space being an encounter with that which is bigger than us. We could call that
Yeah.
the greater other, the great other, the God, the cosmic being, whatever. But the fact that there is something much bigger than us, a far more supreme intelligence that is us also, but from the standpoint of the ego, it's this light of a million suns, like Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita.
Hmm.
And there's a danger of going in thinking that, oh, I'm just gonna like learn how to like manage my addictions, or I'm gonna learn how to like heal that thing from my childhood. But it's like I'm really gonna expose myself to every freaking possibility that there is, and I hope that I can come back in one piece, because this is the hero's journey. This isn't a hero's journey. This is the hero's journey. It is the biggest mission that anybody can undertake in their life, which is to go into the cave, which is symbolic of the places in our psyche that we're not willing to look,
Yeah.
and to face the thing that we're not willing to look at in order to actually become more integrated and whole. And so this is what I think all mythologies are pointing to. This is
Yeah.
what I think all spiritual traditions are pointing to, how to regulate our connection to that thing and to enter into the right relationship with that thing, because it is a dragon, it's huge force, evolutionary force. And I guess just to complete my thought, what I wanted to say is that it's possible. The danger is that we go in, like I was saying with my diet, I had in my mind why I was going to go do the diet, but then I opened the door and I really saw the things,
Hmm.
and the danger is not being able to come back out. I go in, I open that sacred space in my psyche, and Pandora's box opens, and I'm not able to close it. and it's okay to open that box and for the things to come out, but am I able to close it enough and get complete enough so that I can return to this world and I can navigate this world in one piece? And I think that is the reason we have an ego. I think the ego is actually to allow it, me and you, to relate from a place of duality.
Yeah.
Where I know that we're one, we're of one consciousness.
Because you have that experience.
Yes.
You're embodied with that now.
Yeah.
And that's important to like feel that and know that.
Yes. And I experience right now the relativity, and that you're Anker and I'm Grant, and that we can relate. And there's a relationship in the space of duality that allows us to play and have fun. And that place of play and having fun needs boundaries, it needs structures, it needs certain things. Because if I was like, oh, we're all one, and like I'm just knocking shit over, breaking your house, like eating your food, you know, and you're like, Grant, what the hell? Like, you can't just come in here and pretend like this is your place. I'm like, but bro, we're all one, you know, like, don't you see that?
Go with the flow.
It's just, yeah, it's just an illusion, you know. Your cup's not real. Like that was my grandma's cup, you know. Like,
I got this in Tepoztlan. The Quetzalcoatl cup.
Yeah, but you see what I mean? Like the danger is to go to the sacred space to encounter something that is actually real and infinite and inexpansive, but to not be able to come back from that experience. And that's dangerous.
That is the eternal game in question. Like, how much fire can we steal without getting burned?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And
that's a good way to put it. There's a mythology around that.
Prometheus.
Prometheus, yeah.
And there's a great book called Stealing Fire about this very topic by Jamie Wheel, which is excellent. But I thank you for bringing that up, because this is really at the core of why many people like us who come from, broken lineages, that once in our own indigeneity, we used to sit in circles around fires and be with medicine. And we didn't need to talk about things like trauma or integration, because what we healed our traumas together in community, and we were integrated with nature and spirit and God and each other. And so as these very unique manifestations of human beings with sorts of pains and traumas that we're just beginning to understand, that the indigenous surely don't know how to grapple with, at least in the way that we understand them, it's of import to move lightly with discernment, with curiosity, and to go slowly, because this is new terrain for us as Westerners. And there is great merit to honoring and bowing to the indigenous wisdom and traditions in their ways, but coming equipped with the tools that we need. And that's what integration is all about. And so, most of us have heard of stories where people come out of experiences like this and their psyche is a bit fragmented. It's not put back together. We can call that, from a pathology point of view, like psychosis or bipolar. They might call it wetiko in other traditions, and they might treat it differently. But the idea of integration, literally, etymologically, means to take more than one thing and to create something bigger than the whole. And so when we think about coming to life, like, we come as a pure being from source, God, whatever you call it. But our first trauma is descent from that, which is our unique facet of life. And then as we go through the first trimesters in the womb, and then in life, we accumulate pain and trauma and further division from ourselves. And these things, these traumas, which trauma is what we hold on to, not what happens to us, but what lives in our tissues. This is what Gabor Mate has made very clear. It lives in you at that age where it happened, in a certain part of your body, and you have a psychic connection to it. But we don't tend to find these things until we go to deep places with therapy or counseling or plant medicine. So we need to be careful as we harvest and integrate these parts of ourselves, because who knows what kind of core wound is there, and do you have the tools to handle that? Conversely, the other direction, receiving massive cosmological and visionary downloads from other dimensions and planes, Akashic records, whatever language you want, that's also on the table for most of these medicines. So you can have, at one point in one ceremony, a massive convergence of information from within and without. And there are many different tools and ways to integrate one or the other, never mind both at once. And it can become kind of a circus.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that what you mentioned about, like, because there's so much information in the cosmic library, you could say, and especially nowadays with, like, in the new age, use
Hmm.
air quotes, new age, there are so many different ways to portray that information. And I get where am I trying to go with this? Like, so we take psychedelics and we open the door to the cosmic library, and maybe you and I go into a psychedelic journey together, and you have your intention for going in, I have my intention for going in. We press the button, all of a sudden the thing, the fireworks go off, and it's like, this is not what I was intending, but like, holy shit, this is beautiful, this is terrifying, this is da 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 da. And we come back and we compare notes. You're like, dude, I was having conversations with the Pleiadians. They were telling me about the new age and what needs to happen. We need a crystal grid, this mountain, and you have all this information. And I'm like, and I'm comparing notes with you. I'm like, I talked to the trees. I went outside and the tree was telling me that I need to plant more trees, and all this stuff. We come back and we have all this information. And what I'm really interested in is, from a psychedelic experience, what is the next practical step that needs to happen in order to actually give thanks and honor what was received? And it's
Yeah.
usually far, far, far less big than the information uh, would portray, and it's like sometimes people come back and they break up with their partner, they leave
Make
their
big
job, they make
decisions.
these huge
Yeah.
decisions, and it's like, but maybe like the next step was just like get better sleep,
Yeah.
or drink more water or have a little better diet, and sometimes those little things, the little steps, I think get lost in terms of the bigness of it all. And I think that that's where the experience itself can become addictive, and actually we can start to give our power to either the plant or the shaman or the community even, and we start to give our power away to the thing that we think is actually providing us with the energy, but it's
Mm.
really we are the ones sourcing the energy within us, and the plants or the community or whatever is giving us access to it. And the only way that we can honor it and give thanks to it is if we take the next practical step, which is very often simple, small.
I like this perspective. It reminds me of that saying, chopping wood and carrying water. And it can be really inspirational to receive visions like that of the future and these amazing technological processes that we can go through, like, doing crystal grids. And I can't help but be reminded where we truly are in the arc of humanity. I like to believe that we are in that Kali Yuga right now. It's a dark age. And as Westerners, at least you and I coming from the States, we're coming out of a place of deep darkness and shadow and trauma, and growing up in a world where we had like distant and remote fathers and mothers and trained through universities to be employees, to worship the gods of money and technology. Like, we're just getting good again. We're just building a foundation. And I feel that gathering in community, learning to eat cleanly again, planting a garden, planting trees. This is really where it's at. And we get to be inspired by what could come from the future. And we can play in these other dimensions at times and, be buoyed by that. But be careful not to, as they would say, like chase the dragon and get lost in those places, because we are very here right now and very human. And the problems are quite simple these days.
It's like, yeah, thank you so much, because I think that that's the big, for me, that's the big shadow of psychedelic use, is that people assume that because of the amount of intelligence that the plants contain and are transmitting to us, especially in like a well-held ceremony, we can get so much quantum amounts of information, I believe, for healing, for transformation, to improve ourselves, to improve our planet, relationships. Also, there's enormous amount of benefits that I've personally experienced and that I've seen other people experience. So like, this isn't to, I'm saying that because that's my stance on it. And I'm also not like condoning the use of sacrament as like a magic pill, and I think that
Yeah.
with the long list of benefits that we hear about, people assume that I'm going to drink ayahuasca and it's going to save all my it's going to solve all my problems, or it's going to make me a musician, or it's going to, all these things that maybe that like even just me sharing my story, it's like, oh wow, like I'm a transformed person, I'm a better person. But I can't say that it's specifically because of this. It's more so because of the combination of other things um, that happened in parallel. And so I guess where I'm going with that is like this again, the shadow side of this is that, we're in a renaissance, and there's an
Mhm.
enormous amount of accessibility to sacred technology, not just plant medicine, but sacred technology that has the power to heal and
Buffet,
transform
man.
consciousness. It's a buffet. Yeah, totally. I mean, wow, how blessed are we? Like, seriously.
But do we
And
know what to eat?
but do we know what to
And
eat?
who's making it, what the ingredients are.
Yeah, totally, man. And it's like, we you ever had a conversation with someone where you're like, they're talking about all sorts of cool stuff, but like none of it has anything to do with what's here right now.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah, I do.
And it's like, that's a problem, and a lot of people are getting further and further away from what's actually really important and what's real, and starting to think about or to think, and starting to project about all these things and what needs to happen and how to save the planet and what we need to do. And there's like, and some of those
Mm.
thoughts are really noble, and those ideas are really noble, and who's to say that they're not wrong either, like especially if their channel opens up and they get plugged into some high intelligence and they're receiving legitimate,
It's a thing,
it's a thing. Yeah, it is a thing.
but it's what you do with it.
Yeah, but what can we do right now?
Yeah.
And are we doing that thing right now? And are we using the tools that we have to help us become more centered here and like on our path here, um, which I think is what allows us to actually make an influence and make a difference for what is to come.
And I believe there is a direct relationship between this far out visionary experience we have about some otherwise, fantastical, futuristic experience of spirit, technology, and what we do in our day to day after that ceremony. Perhaps it is strengthening your practice by doing more breath work or eating healthier or spending more time in nature that is going to help you heal and integrate this part of you that has been trapped from some early trauma in your life or past life that is going to change your life path to get towards that thing that you encountered in your journey. There's always a connection. And the meaning and the connection isn't always abundantly clear right away, but the active integration is embodiment. Integration is embodiment. It's what you do, literally journaling, practice, singing, writing, dancing. It's how you're engaging with the material afterwards. And that does create way for the unfolding of what you are meant to become and experience and create in the world. Cool.
Bam.
So before we close, I'd like you to offer any advice or tips you might want to give somebody who's interested in starting to work with psychedelics, entheogens, or plant medicines in an intentional way for growth.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe something you might have said to your younger self.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, like I was sharing kind of at the beginning, for myself was to get clear about why am I doing this? Like really, why am I doing this? And am I willing to accept the possibility of the fact that this could totally fuck up my life? Like this, that I'm dealing with a power that I know little about.
Mm.
And am I willing to accept the responsibility of that? And that coming to that clarity is already empowering, and it already gives a certain amount of like sincerity to the preparation process, which I think creates stability of my own structure and like how I'm going to enter into what is maybe a prearranged container. But is my container set, or is my container already leaky and fragmented?
Yeah, this container here.
Yeah. And so learning how to get myself in the right order has to do with like, am I asking myself the right questions? Why am I doing this? What's this for? If I start to get more and more clear about that in myself, then all of a sudden my behaviors change, because then I'm going to take my diet and preparation and integration process a lot more seriously. Um, and so I would just say starting there. Um, Also the importance of noticing how easy it is for my mind to slip into the kind of quick fix. Like I think that we in the Western world generally, and most people that I've talked to experience this to some degree or another. There's tends to be kind of an idea that we're gonna just have it all right now, or it's just gonna kind of be fixed, or like I'm just gonna get the magic technique and it's gonna make everything better, and like I just need to get the right diet, or I just need to have the right ceremony, or like, or the right method, like there's this insidious quality, I think, that has a lot to do with the conditioning of the Western mind. And I don't think that anybody's at fault for this. I think that's just how the Western culture has kind of, we've been a product of that.
Yeah.
And this is why I talked about, I think earlier, about like apprenticing, and the idea of spending time with the teacher is like, the point of that is to actually to purify these tendencies, that it's like, oh, like I can learn everything there is to know by doing like a month-long course, or whatever. It's like, well, no, month-long course will give me the tools to start walking the path. And then maybe 10 years down the road, I will have a couple things that I can say about it. But the opposite is true. So there's a month-long course, and then now there's a lot to say about it. And it's like 10 years down the road, you're looking back, or I'm looking back, and I'm like, why did I think I knew so much about yoga when I first started? And it's just because I had a couple powerful mystical experiences early on that showed me the secrets of the universe, and I wanted to talk about it, but there wasn't enough integration and embodiment for that to it was just kind of me processing, actually, publicly, like I was publicly processing in the guise of teaching. And so I don't know where did I go on that? You're asking me tips and tricks about psychedelic use. Keep it to yourself. Like, do your thing, do your work with it, and like the gems that are revealed aren't for anybody else.
Don't cast pearls before swine.
Totally. And it's like, if we're really serious about doing our work and we do it quietly and humbly, then the reward is much greater than if it's a loud charade of, hey, look at me, I'm doing blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, I would say just being quiet and humble is a much more safe and effective way to approach things that are very powerful.
And there's something magical about that. If you continue to speak a story about something really profound to you, that has great meaning to you, it dilutes its potency in some ways, especially if it's cast before people who don't understand and will question it and may shame you. And so what I'm hearing is, know your why. If you know your why, you will know your way. And on that way, on that path, find a teacher, find a discipline, find a community, and stay humble and hold those insights and those pearls close until you know it's time to share or to teach. Does that sound like a good summary?
Really good summary. Yeah.
Cool. Do you have any offerings to the world, to the communities out there that you want to share? Perhaps you have a teaching or a retreat you want to make clear to our viewers?
Yeah, so I have a yoga school that I run here in the mountain, where brother Anker and I live in Costa Rica in the mountains of Chiripo. And once a year, we do a 3-week training for people who are interested in diving into the science of yoga as a transformative technology. This is with Keepers of the Earth, name of the yoga school that Anker had mentioned earlier in the podcast. Keepersoftheearth.co is the website where you can read more. Keepersoftheearth.co. And yeah, that's pretty much like the synthesis of my life's work. That's where I direct people who want to learn more, want to study, because outside of that, I'm free to run around and play and make appearances on my friend's podcast and pop into other retreats and just do things that I find are meaningful. And when people want to actually study, then I tell them, I can't tell you everything you want to know, but if you spend 3 weeks with me, you might learn a couple things.
I like that. Well, Grant, it's been a great pleasure to have you on here. I love being in this community with you and seeing how you show up and you serve and you gather people, creating true Sangha and community. It's the people that keep me here. And I'm constantly inspired and humbled by the things that you bring and the directions that they point me in. And the shadows in myself, they allow me to look at. They say in men's work that men refine each other, like iron sharpening iron. And happy to cross irons with you in this community, brother.
Dude, bro. Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you all for watching. All the information about anything we mentioned of note that requires links or contacts will be in the show notes.